folks, welcome back to the show where our signals do get crossed sometimes, but our swords always are. It is the Crossing Swords podcast. And I mean, we are on an upswing, folks. There is just no other way to talk about it. Sabres obviously riding a recent positivity train, you could say, mixed in with the Four Nations. It feels like they have not had anything to be upset about in a month plus. We'll see if that can change tonight against Anaheim. But before it does, let's get our co-hosts in here. We got myself, VC3, Vinny Cristiano, and Mike Bunt. Bye from Bunt. With that said, this episode of the Crossing Swords podcast sponsored by the place where you can win more, lots more, the region's premier entertainment destination, Batavia Downs. And that's something that these Sabres, these boys in blue and gold, and sometimes black and red, have been doing a lot more often, boys, winning. So with that said, Vinny, Mike, whoever wants to jump in first, biggest takeaway from this recent upswing?
I'll let you go first, Vinny.
I appreciate it. Very kind of you, Mike. I think ultimately, my biggest takeaway is sort of simple, and that is to a certain extent I don't know if I want to use the word solution, but yeah, I think like the capability is there, and I think that's ultimately something that does make me and maybe a lot of people watching these games a little more frustrated, especially during the losing in the beginning of the season and that long losing streak, is that we've seen this team and the majority of the players play well. And here we're seeing in this swing them play well for an extended period of time. So I guess the takeaway is, hey, they're capable of it. And then, of course, that just brings the question, A, why can't they do it longer? Or B, even when they're off, why are they off their game for so long to put themselves in such big of a hole that these long stretches of success aren't – like, I don't really need them to be the norm right now. I don't need them to win 7 or 6 of their last 7 the entire year. That'd be neat, but I don't need that. Ultimately, what I need, though, is for them to have the lows not be as low. So takeaway is that the highs are that high, just more questions about the lows.
Yeah, my biggest takeaway is that this team absolutely should be in the Eastern Conference wildcard chase, and that their 13-game losing streak just absolutely destroyed any hopes they had of making the postseason this year. And it's really sad when you think about it, because during that streak, obviously they missed Dahlin for more than half of it. They have a losing record without Dahlin this year. When Dahlin plays, they're not great, but they're above 500 as far as getting points. And it's just one of those things where you look at this team right now, they have a -8 goal differential. That's better than half the NHL at the current moment. They're number 2 in the league on 5-on-5 goals for per 60 and top 10 in goals per game. That's ahead of teams like Colorado, Toronto, and New Jersey, unless something changed in the last day or two since I checked. But my biggest takeaway is, like, this team is right there amongst the teams in the middle of the pack, but they find ways to choke games, and they always get in these ruts early in the season where they have to make up ground. And it's just unfortunate because I see them right now 11 points behind teams like Ottawa, Detroit, around that point. Not exactly, but those teams aren't 5 wins better than the Sabres. They're not. But unfortunately, when you blow enough games, you put yourself in an impossible situation. And what we're seeing right now, I think, is a team that how they look when there's no expectations on them, when there is no pressure to perform, when they are just loose, relaxed, playing normal hockey. The product ain't horrible, but it doesn't matter if you're not going to play the same brand of hockey when there is pressure on you. The mute button, Maniac.
I was going to say this bunt doesn't stop. I let VC3 down already. I'm sorry, guys. But my biggest takeaway, neither of them are really original, so I'll preface it with that. But my is that they don't belong in the group of teams they're at. Like you said, Bunt, the goal differential, you look at the teams around them, it's all like -30, -20, -40, somewhere in that range. And then, yeah, you look at the wild card picture and just the spreads and everything. And the thing that sticks out really over everything, and you alluded to this as well, Mike, is just that if they had gone like 4-7-2 during those 13 games, it would be a world of difference right now for how we're looking at this team and where they should be. But obviously, we can't do anything with what happened. We can't undo the 13-game losing streak as much as we wish we could with all of our Sabres hearts. With that said, Sabres hearts might be getting pulled on the strings as the trade deadline looms near. Mike, I don't know if you want to kick us off here because you were alluding to, the potential directions that they could go in the pre-show, but ultimately, let's say you keep around a 500 record between now and the trade deadline. Obviously, things change if you go one way or the other. If they kind of hold serve at 500 between now and then, what would you do if you were in the GMKA seat coming up on this trade deadline?
Yeah. For me, this is pretty simple. I want to be aggressive. I want to add to this roster. I'm not looking to sell. Now, it depends on who you're talking about. Like if it's a player like Jason Zucker and you can get value back for him, people obviously would say that's selling. To me, that's not selling. He's a 33-year-old. He's probably not part of your long-term future. Get what you can and send him to a playoff team. If you don't envision signing him back and bringing him back for another year or two. But as far as other spots on the roster, I'm looking at getting pieces that can make this team a playoff team going forward. So all options are on the table for me. I would say the name to look out for the most is Dylan Cousins, because he's obviously, this is 2 years in a row now where he hasn't lived up to the expectations of his contract. We gave him a pass last year. This year, it's hard to give him a pass 2 consecutive years. He's still young. He still has value. There's other teams that could talk themselves into believing that a former top 10 pick could still become a solid player, that maybe it's just the Sabres organization that's failing him. And really, you don't really have many other chips on the table outside of Rochester to really get stuff in return. Jack Quinn right now doesn't have much value because he has not performed at an adequate level. You're not going to get rid of a Ryan McLeod that you just spent an asset to get in. So unless you're going to get rid of a star on your team or risk getting rid of an Owen Power, possibly Bowen Byram, those are guys that I don't know if I would feel really comfortable moving on from, because I still think that Owen Power has a high ceiling to do something in the league. That's a risk I'm not willing to take yet. Bowen Byram has been fantastic this year. But I do think you need to find a way to be aggressive, because what does Kevin Adams tell us every season? He tells us, well, free agents don't want to come to Buffalo. People with no trade clauses, they all have Buffalo on their list. So what do you have to do? You're going to have to give up a talented young player like Dylan Cousins, probably match it up with another player, maybe a pick, to try to find a young, talented player that hasn't yet got to the point where they have a no trade clause. And you're going to have to try to be aggressive like that, because if you really want to get that top end talent in Buffalo, you're going to probably have to do it by a trade and then fill depth out with free agency and other spots like that. And it's the one thing this team really hasn't done enough of in the last 2 years. After the 91-point season, I would have told you they were a couple smart, savvy moves away from being a playoff team. It never happened. They went after Eric Johnson and low-level guys last year. McLeod and Zucker, like guys I like that this team needs more of, but not enough of it. I think after the experiment with Quinn and Cousins has failed 2 years in a row, you can't go into next season hoping that those guys are going to finally find it on your second line. It's okay to have them, but you need other guys ahead of them in the lineup.
No Friday news dump coming next week. This deadline is March 7th. I'm looking forward to this on a Friday. VC, what would you do if you're in the GMC? What do you think? And I asked this very worriedly. What do you think is going to happen in between now and next Friday?
I think, to be honest with you, what I think is going to happen is probably nothing. I don't have a feeling of confidence that certain moves within the organization are going to be made. I do have a somewhat confident feeling that, like, I don't want to say literally nothing is going to happen. I feel like there's going to be like one move that probably moves a piece from Rochester, and I think it ultimately is a like, okay, fair enough, I guess, move. I don't think it's going to be something like moving Roseanne. I don't think it's going to be something like moving like Costa Hellenius. I don't think those pieces get moved. Ultimately, I think along sort of side of the lines that Mike is talking about, that might be what you need to do to go get the pieces that Mike is saying that, you know, he thinks we need. And I don't necessarily disagree with him. Because, yeah, I think to a certain extent, the philosophy of the organization was we're going to draft well, and we're going to develop these players in Rochester at the time, in Cincinnati, you know, then to Rochester, now, of course, Jacksonville. being the affiliate before the Rochester and the AHL level. And those players would come up and play in Buffalo. Well, to a certain extent, that has sort of worked. I mean, JJ Peterka is playing pretty okay. I mean, he hasn't looked like maybe he has at times, but ultimately, Quinn has had those injuries that set him back a little bit. And then, I think Thompson playing in Rochester a little bit, certainly helped him. And you can say the same thing for UPL, of course, and Levi looks great down there right now, but ultimately we know he's not ready for that NHL level. So my point here is that I don't know that any moves are going to do anything significant at the NHL level, because I don't know that they have much that they really want to move at the NHL level, because the one piece that would make the most sense is like the opposite of what I think they know the fans want them to do, which is sell. And that's that Zucker point. I mean, the guy right now is third on the team in points, and he's third on the team in goals. I mean, looking back on it, that's a great signing. Now, ultimately, I think it's not that it's not a great signing, but the context of that is actually more that not enough people are scoring goals other than him, or getting points to put themselves in the higher rankings. I think most people would have assumed Peterka and Quinn would be above Zucker in that category most likely, and it wouldn't just be the predicted Thompson and Dahlin above him right now in points, at least. So ultimately, I don't really see them moving Zucker. I think it'll be, unfortunately, I just have this weird feeling it'll be a situation where we keep him and then sign him, and then he doesn't score 18 goals at this point next year and doesn't have 44 points, which is third on the team as of almost the beginning of March. And then we're kind of like, oh, now we're stuck with this contract on this aging forward who, played well one year. We rewarded him for that. And, then we're stuck. But it just seems like that's like that end of cycle. So I don't know that they'll do that. And I also don't think they're going to add. I think it's just going to be sort of lateral moves, if that makes sense.
GM Kevin entering the NHL, waiver site or whatever must just be like filled with like PTSD from everything that's happened. I mean, it's just tough. It's tough right now for sure for Sabres fans. I know we were marveling at it, but DC focus real quick before we move on from the trade deadline talk. Do either of you guys expect Dylan Cousins to be moved? I know that the right price can come up, so I'm putting you to your feet to the fire. Will he be moved or will he not before this trade?
Isn't that's more of a better question would be, do you expect the Sabres to make a move or not? Because if they make a move, Dylan Cousins is probably the guy that's going. If they make a move. I'll say like probably better. I'm kind of with Vinny, probably a better chance he stays than goes. But as much as we say that Kevin Adams doesn't make moves and that he doesn't make things happen, he does go forward with trades. Like if you compare him versus other GMs in the league over the last year, he has made moves. The problem is he hasn't made enough moves to get this team over the top. Like if you break down the couple trades that he made in the last year, the fact that he got Bo Byram for Casey Middlestat, how many people were flaming Kevin Adams for that at that time?
I got to jump in here because you're absolutely correct. You're hitting the nail on the head. And it goes back to me the same with McLeod and Zucker this offseason. Sure. People were talking about these additions like they were like coming out of a clown car, when realistically they've done a good job to replace the void left by Skinner and Co. Now, again, the Sabres Twitter of it has moved their messaging from, no, we didn't say those guys sucked. We said we needed more of them, which is very interesting to see. But yes, but you're hitting the nail on the head here.
They're hypocrites about it. They always are moving
Bunt's things. Words, not mine. Bunt's words.
No, but like that's the thing. Like I'll say this. I think that Kevin Adams probably deserves to be fired, but I also will compliment him for getting Bo Byram for Casey Middlestat. Sabres fans were talking about getting rid of their leading scorer at the time. The same guy has like 35 points in like 55 games and is a minus 13 in Colorado. Casey Middlestat stinks. Like he has been awful this season in Colorado, while Bo Byram is on pace for a 40-point season, and he's like a plus 11. Getting McLeod for Savoy. Yes, you gave up a little bit, but McLeod has been one of the Sabres' best players this year. He's a plus double digits. And he's on pace for a career high in points and goals. Zucker was a good signing, even if you had to overpay a little bit. But I think the big question that we all have is, does Kevin Adams not make moves because he's being held back by ownership? on certain aspects regarding salary and guys on the team? Or is it because he has too much faith in his young players? My biggest problem with the management in Buffalo isn't that the Sabres don't have talent, isn't that the Sabres don't have potential to become a good team in the next few years. It's that there's been too much faith in the young core of this team when there has been signs that they needed more help for the last 2 to 3 years. So my big thing is, yes, Zucker was good, McLeod was good, Greenway's good. You need more guys that can help them out. The whole idea to have Cousins and Quinn on the second line as early as they have is what's held back this team. If the Sabres just had a competent second line to go with guys like Zucker, McLeod, Greenway in the third line, they'd be a playoff team right now. So when I look at it, I'll wrap up the trade deadline stuff right now. Cousins being a $7 million per year player who's underperforming, who the rest of the league still thinks has value because the Sabres have messed up guys like Sam Reinhart in the past and Jack Eichel in the past, that this might be your final opportunity to really get something back for Dylan Cousins. So if you think that he's not going to be the player that you paid him the $7 million for, trade him while you can still get something back, get rid of that $7 million contract, open your books to be more aggressive and fix the second line. Because Quinn is not going to get a contract anytime soon that's going to be of high value. So if Quinn doesn't work out, it's not much of a risk. You're not going to pay him much anyway. But Cousins is the guy, if you keep him, that can really hurt your roster management going forward.
I like it.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead. Put a button on it, VC.
Yeah, I think ultimately I sort of wanted to agree with a good amount of that and ultimately take a bit of blame for it, even though I'm not a huge, and I probably should be based on just for career decisions. I'm not like a get on social media and talk about the Sabres guy. But I admit to thinking and saying on this almost the same things, which is I don't know if this guy's going to be good. And then, we actually need, I said the whole time, I will give myself a credit for predicting Zucker to be one of the top 3 goal scorers. I'll give myself credit for that. But ultimately, I definitely will ultimately only interject just to say, I'm going to put the hand up and say guilty as charged at times. And I will try to be better.
Thank you. I mean, that's the accountability. Let's face it. If we had seen it from the Sabres earlier this season, we might not be in this mess. But speaking of messes, we're moving on to the last third of our show as the Sabres get into the final third of their season. I'll keep this one a little bit more streamlined because this can get open-ended like an encyclopedia. What are the 1 to 2 things outside of making the playoffs, outside of winning and going nuts, that are tangible that you would really like to see from this team in the final third of the season? I'll kick this one off since I know I haven't gotten my feet too wet. I would like to see UPL improve the numbers a little bit. I do think that is part of the defense, but really it's the goaltending overall. I would just like some positivity around the goaltending, whether that's Devin Levi coming up and having some success at the NHL level, or if that's UPL's numbers improving. By the way, just for the record, UPL is 11th in the NHL in saves this season. So I know you guys are trying to point to some chart and say he's not elite, but he's still top tier as far as saves is concerned. He's just getting a lot of shots on goal. Okay, people? With that said, goaltending situation improve. And yeah, if we do keep him, I just want to see Dylan Cousins get some confidence back. Just not playing with any confidence right now. It would be impossible to be playing with any confidence if you're him. Get the confidence back, even if that's just a 2-goal game here or there. Get it back before the end of the season. Bunty, why don't we kick it off with you? What do you want to see on the final third?
Yeah, so normally in the past, I would have said I want to see the young kids really step up and show something to give me hope going into next season. But how many times have we said that over the last 3 years? We don't even know if having success at the end of the season will really translate into the next year. So as much as I would love to see Dylan Cousins and Jack Quinn really take off and give me some hope going into the offseason, I don't trust that a strong finish to this year will really mean anything for those 2 guys performing next year from a confidence level, because we've seen Cousins have success at world championships with Canada and other things, and none of it has ever really carried over. So what I really am hoping for overall from this team is, one, play better defensively down the stretch. Their defense has been atrocious at many times this year, and we need better goaltending. UPL, his metrics have been down this year after a breakout season last year. It's funny. Like UPL is an interesting topic because 3 years ago, everybody in Buffalo on Sabres Twitter thought he was a bust who wasn't going to mean nothing. And then last year he breaks out, and he's the only reason why they're winning games at that point. And now it's kind of gone back to the point where like we're middle in between, where some people are still talking about how good he is, even though he has like an 895 save percentage. Other people are like he's costing the team games because he's allowing up weak goals. Like he has the ability to have sensational moments and then follow them up with some very weak moments. And I think that's just a microcosm of this Sabres team in general. They have the ability to go on the road in Nashville and look great for 10 minutes straight where they're owning the pace of play, owning making nice hits, getting chances, and maybe not even scoring a goal out of it. And then they'll have a 30-second sample size where they mess up and they allow 2 goals and they're trailing. I just want the Sabres to be a little bit more consistent. I know that's a lot to ask from them, but my main thing is, and I brought this up earlier before the show, 2 years ago, the Sabres could score a lot of goals, but they couldn't keep the puck out of their net. They had 91 points, but they were -4, I think, goal differential. Last year, they had 7 less points, I believe, but they had a positive goal differential despite scoring about 50 less goals than the year before. But it felt like such a horrible year because they didn't have people putting the puck in the net. This year, to be top 10 in goals, but near the bottom of the league in goals allowed, I just want to know, like, is it possible for this team to play well in both zones simultaneously? Like, is it something where they only score when they give up chances, like where they have to be aggressive offensively and take all these risks and put themselves in defensively liable, like bad situations? Or is there a middle ground where they can be 12th in scoring and 18th in goals allowed? Because if they could just figure things out and find a little bit more middle ground, I think they could be a good team with a couple proper additions, either at the trade deadline or the offseason. So I just need to see them continue to build off of this recent stretch that they've had.
It's unfortunate you asked for 2 things, and ultimately then at first I will say you both sort of stole my first one, which was about UPL's save percentage. I wanted to see his save percentage go up by at least 10 points. I wanted him to get up. He's at 895 right now, like you mentioned, Mike. I wanted him to get to at least go from 895 to 905. But that's not actually, I'm not going to go with that because that would be cheating and also boring since you've both talked about that. The Sabres essentially need to go 19-6-2 in their last 20, they played 55 games, right? So ultimately, you've got to play 22 games, and not 22 games, 55, 65, 75. That's 27 games. That took way too long. I promise I went to school. Anyway, in all seriousness, like getting to 91 points is a place that you shouldn't have to claw so hard at the end of the season to get to. But the only way you're going to do that is not blowing leads that you get in the first period. So I would like to see the Sabres, if they get a 2-goal lead in the first period, I would love to ask them to not forfeit said lead for the rest of the season. However, I understand that's unrealistic, so I'm going to say, please, Sabres, only blow 2 of them the rest of the year.
Okay.
And of those 2 that you may forfeit, please hang on to 1 of them and win the game in regulation, hopefully. Second point I will ask is a combination of 2 things, because one's also kind of a bailout. A healthy Tage Thompson, that's more of just along the record thing. Like, I think the only way Sabres do the things they need to do is by maybe their best or one of their 2 best players staying healthy. So a healthy Tage Thompson would be great. And then the other thing I would love to see from an entertainment perspective, more goals from specifically JJ Peterka and Alex Tuck would be something that I'd like to see here for the rest of the season. I agree that the defense needs to play better, but ultimately, based on what I think is possible, I think it's more likely that we score more, those players start scoring more consistently than it is that the defense improves their play and our own end. So I'm looking to hopefully see that happen from some of our other offensive playmakers.
The way that we have been like Stockholm syndromed by this team to just be like, I know you're not going to be consistent, but if you could try, and if you have a 2-goal lead, only blow like a couple of them, like that, like those things on paper are insane. But I love it because it's absolutely true with where this team's put us, Bunty.
You know what a good word for what we're all kind of trying to say? They need to be better at grinding out victories. It's not about playing pretty. It's not about winning 8-2. It's about when you have a goal lead with 3 minutes left, finding a way to finish off the game and not letting the other team tie it up with an empty net. It's about when you're up 3, continuing to play hard and not lackadaisical and not allow that cheap goal to make it 2, to where that team still has that belief. If you finish out the second period and not allow a goal with 5 minutes or under left in the second period, that third period becomes a lot easier for you.
Mm-hmm.
It's doing the little things. It's dumping the puck but not icing it in a crucial situation. It's all the small little things that veteran teams know how to do, but young teams sometimes don't. And we forget sometimes this is still one of the, if not, I think the youngest team in the NHL still. So it's frustrating. But if they can find a way to grind out things better, the wins will come. And I think we've seen a little bit of that in the last month. Some of the things that were hard for them to do earlier in the season, they have found a way to get a little bit better at. But we're also seeing a couple different things happen that we didn't see earlier in the year. We're seeing the best version of Tage Thompson recently. He's been on fire. This version of Tage Thompson is an elite player in the NHL. Over 82 games, he'd be on pace for around 46 goals, around 46, 47 goals. So if you have this version of Tage Thompson the whole season, you're going to be a good team. But what we're also discovering right now is that Rasmus Dahlin is the most irreplaceable player on this team, and that it's hard talking about him because the Sabres stink and people.
Was that me?
Oh no, not you. I think it's him.
The Dahl internet got the best of him on that one for
That's
sure.
tough.
Well, I'm sure I was gonna say I think we're gonna get him back here momentarily. Did you get Dahlin interneted?
that was weird. That's never happened to me before. But what I was gonna say is, with a guy like Dahlin, it's weird saying this because the Sabres stink, and a lot of people don't want to give him his due because his numbers from a plus minus and some other things don't live up to the top guys. Dahlin right now is playing like a top 5 to 10 defenseman in hockey.
Oh,
and when he's at this level, the Sabres are a way more dangerous team. He's a point per game player this season, essentially. He's on pace for, if he played an 82 game season, a 78, 79 point season. And I think what we're seeing is that when he's on the ice, it's a completely different team. And I hate, you're right. We can't talk about the 13-game losing streak. It happened. There's nothing you can do to reverse it. But he goes down in the first shift of the third period against Colorado in a game that they blow a 4-0 lead in regulation. And that was, I think, the 4th game of the 13-game losing streak. And then he misses like the next 7 games. I truly believe if Dahlin didn't have the back spasms and played the rest of those games, this team is within a point or two of a playoff spot. So I guess how I look at it right now is, if this is recent play is the result of them suddenly figuring things out, suddenly putting it together in year 1 of Lindy Ruff and his system and scheme, well, then that's a sign that if they can finish out the season strong, that maybe there's the potential for a big leap next year. New Jersey went from low 60s to 112 points, I believe, in a 1-year span. They had a 49-point increase in 1 year with Lindy Ruff as their head coach. And I'm not saying the Sabres are going to do anything like that, but it seems like with Lindy teams, a lot of times they figure something out. And once they figure it out, they become very difficult to play against. If they can finish this last 25-game stretch and say they win 15 out of the 25, I know that's a lot asking for the Sabres. But if they could find a way to get 15 points, and maybe they end with like in the low 80s, I'm going to think going into next year that if you make the right moves in the offseason, that you should absolutely have a chance. Because I don't think Ottawa's good. I don't think Detroit's good. I don't think New York
Rangers suck.
They all stink.
Bruins suck.
That's why I'm even more mad. The Bruins are like a minus 27 goal differential, and they're like 10 points ahead of, like, on paper, it makes, like, I'll end it like this. The standings make sense to Sabres fans because we're so used to them being in this spot over the last 14 years. But when you dive deeper into things like goal differential, when you dive deeper into the
5v5 numbers,
yeah, like there's really like two things holding this team back.
first period goal differential.
It's special teams and it's defense. And defense contributes to the goaltending. If the defense gets a little bit better, UPL stats will improve. And then if the special teams can make just some small improvements, this team is right there. But I can't say that too loudly because I picked them to make the playoffs this season. And I look like a fool if I would do that again. So I got to be quiet when I say all of that.
I'm just going to say this not literally, but more as a joke. I sort of agree that it's like just two things they need to fix: special teams and goaltending. Well,
those are big things.
Yeah, right. They're big things because if you look at the game of hockey, you have like offense, defense, special teams, goaltending. So you like basically 50% of the game of hockey they need to improve. That's probably not, recipe for success, but I know that's not literally the point, but ultimately it's kind of funny to think of it that way. But yeah, I agree. Like the goal differential thing, I mean, the Sabres are better in goal differential than Detroit, than Boston, than New York, than Montreal, than Philly, and Pittsburgh by a lot. They're also better than Vancouver, Calgary, Utah, St. Louis, Anaheim, Seattle, Nashville, Chicago, and San Jose. And for the record, Vancouver and Detroit are in wildcard spots right now. So you're basically, in terms of a goal differential standpoint, and this is just agreeing with your take earlier, from a goal differential standpoint, which is an oversimplification, they're in a wild card spot from a goal differential standpoint only, which is an oversimplification of the game. But ultimately, that goes back to another thing you said, which is, yeah, they can win games 8-2, but also then they get, then they lose these close ones. So it's like their goal differential in these games they win is huge, and then they lose all these close ones and occasionally get.
But isn't that revealing? Like that's, to me, that's telling. Like when you have the ability to just overpower teams and blow them out, that means you have talent. Like you're not just getting lucky. I know Sneaky Joe tried to have something the other day that like, oh, all bad teams have this. No, that's not true. You have teams like Pittsburgh that are like minus 40 goal differentials right now. Boston's like almost minus 30. The Sabres 2 years ago were a minus like 4. Last year, they were a +1. Now they're a -8. So you're talking about in a 3-year period, they're a -11. You wouldn't expect a team that has basically one of the worst records in the NHL over that span to be a -11 over a 3-year span. What it really shows is a lack of mental toughness. It's a mentally fragile team. To be able to blow out teams, but then lose all the close games means that in those close games, you don't have the belief in yourself or your teammates, and you're doing the small things incorrectly every time. So they need to find a way to get better at grinding things out. And I know grinding is such a generic way of saying it, things like it's not point to a specific thing. Like the real answer is like in a close game, when it's a 1-goal game in the third period, sometimes you just need to find a way to score a goal to tie it, to force overtime, to get a point. Sometimes you just need your goalie to make the basic save, like in a big moment, and not let a weak one in. Sometimes you need your defenseman to be smart and not take a penalty in a tie game with 4 minutes left. Like this Sabres team continues to find new ways to lose games, blow games. And you think about it, if you could just eliminate 3 to 4 of those a year, we would be right there. Like we act like it's Sabres fandom, like this team has just, and like this year, I understand the standings are not pretty, but we act like this team in the last 3 years is the same team that we've been watching when they had Eichel and Reinhart and they were struggling to get 75 points in the season. Like the Sabres over the last 3 years have actually been okay in terms of compete level, in terms of being in games. Their problem is they're young, they're immature, and they find ways to lose. The Eichel Reinhart years, for as much talent as they had, and like those teams might have possibly had like 3 or 4 Hall of Famers on the ice at one time, which is crazy because Eichel, Reinhart, Dahlin, like a couple other guys, possibly, like those teams sucked with a lot more talent.
Oh yeah.
So what I almost like, the part I do forgive Kevin Adams is like, I understand why he has that belief. Like he sees it, but if they can find a way to move on from some of these guys, they really, I'll put it like this. I would not be surprised if 2 years from now, the Buffalo Sabres were in like the top third of the NHL. But that's all assuming that ownership and management are willing to make the tough decisions to get the team in that spot. And unfortunately, over the last 14 years, we've all given up on that hope. Like, if you were an outsider and you just looked at the Buffalo Sabres right now, and not this season, but like you just looked at the roster, you just looked at the team, I think you would be saying they got a potential 50-goal scorer.
They're
They
right
have a
around
top
the corner. Yep.
a potential top 5 defenseman. You have a good, not great goalie in UPL. You have a talented goalie prospect who could be very good in the future. You have a very good deep pair potential when you have guys like Bowen Byram on your team, guys like Owen Power on your team. You have talented depth, young guys that are going to be good in the future, and Benson and Kulik. Like, I would look at this team and I'd say they're just a good general manager away from molding together a playoff team. But we have all lost so much hope that there's just no way that any Sabres fan is going to go out on the limb and say, oh, it's going to happen. Especially like the positive ones like me that have been burnt. Like, we're too scared to go out on the limb again.
I agree. Burned too many times. But with that said, speaking of burned too many times, tonight versus Anaheim, minus 190 in some spots. Anaheim is 7-1-1 in its last 9 games. These numbers aren't, these math ain't mathing for me, boys. What's happening here? I know Zegras is suspended, but what the hell?
I'll let you go first, Vinny.
Uh-oh, mute monster.
That's a real shame. I'm sorry. Admittedly, I was trying to, at the time, I was trying to look up some information. I didn't want the typing sounds to be there, and that's a rookie mistake.
Tale as old as time.
It is. It really is. But ultimately, when you look at like Anaheim's stats and you're like, you're thinking about how integral Zegras may or may not be, he is like important to this team, but I think they're going to be able to reproduce some of that success even without him. And I think it's going to be difficult for the Sabres to come back here and say, hey, we're going to just roll. You're not going to roll over the Ducks the way that, like, I think the NHL has looked at the Ducks over the past couple of years. They haven't exactly been good. But I just, for some reason, I feel like there's a tendency, and this is just a very unfounded on stats feeling, that the Sabres seem to play better against West Coast teams. I don't know why I feel that way. And maybe that's unfounded. But ultimately, I feel like the Sabres are in for a good game tonight. I'm feeling like a 4-3 game, honestly. Whether the Sabres are up 4-1 and Anaheim scores 2 late, or if the Sabres are up 3-0 and Anaheim wins 4-3, we don't know. We'll find out in a couple hours.
Yeah, I'll be real. I was seeing Sabres minus 195 earlier, and I feel like the average person betting on hockey across the league just assumes the Sabres are going to lose on a nightly basis. So to see them favored by that much was a shock. I would probably put my money on the Sabres just because for them to be favored by this much, I feel like it's kind of selling you like everyone expects them to win right now. I know when everybody expects a team to win, normally go the other way, but no one ever expects the Sabres to win. So that's kind of telling me something right there. I think the Sabres are going to keep it going and win, which means we're probably going to lose like 6-1. So given our luck, it's sad that's how we're conditioned as Sabres fans. We're minus 195, and I'm still worried about, like, could we blow this and look like crap?
Maniac. One way or another, we'll find a way to make it embarrassing, I'm sure. But one area where you can go that's not embarrassing is Batavia Downs, where you could win more, lots more. Go check out their promotions they got going there. Vinny's got 4-3 some team tonight. What's your prediction for tonight, Bunty?
I was right the last time I did a prediction with you earlier this year. So I'm gonna go Sabres 5-2.
Okay. I got the Sabres keeping it rolling as well, 4-2. We'll see what happens. A win tonight, and they're kind of back in maybe the single-digit wild card points range. So we'll see. Thank you for tuning along with us here on the Cross and Swords Pod, the show, where, yes, we do sometimes get our signals crossed, but our swords always are. We got 1 hour till game time, and it's just one thing to say. Let's go Sabres.